Well, I think it's not there. I mean, we have an epic loss of trust, and that's what's leading people toward more extreme politics. I mean, we see that in the level of fear in politics has grown. Most people today don't vote for their candidate; they vote against the other candidate. Right? I mean, that is one of the hallmarks of the current level of sort of paranoia and fear in our system. We have in 2024, we're likely to get the rematch, right? Biden, Trump, the rematch. So we're headed toward a rematch in 2024, driven largely by this fear of the other, right? And that's what dominates. That's what always dominates fourth turnings.
Think. Act. And prosper. You are now tuned into the Money Level Show.
Hello, everyone. It's Daryl from the Money Level Show. And here we think, act, and prosper. This channel focuses on changing financial trajectories and building legacies. Today, we have the opportunity of interviewing Neil Howe. Neil Howe is the author of the books Generations, The Fourth Turning, and the new book, The Fourth Turning is Here. A fun fact about Neil is that he and his partner, Bill, coined the term millennials, which represents my generation. Neil is a demographer that focuses on the cycle of history within the United States and how this history can inform us on what to expect in the future. According to Neil's research, we are currently in the fourth turning, which is set to end around the year 2030. So as we interview Neil today, please put on your thinking caps and think about how to protect yourself and your wealth moving forward. I also want to let you all know that in my description is a link to the New Orleans Investment Conference. You should consider clicking that link and coming because they're going to have amazing speakers such as Lynn Alden, Rick Rule, George Gammon, Peter Schiff, and many others. This conference is put on every year by Brian Lundeen and his team, and it will be from November 1st through November 4th. So I hope to see you all there. Click the link in the description below to join via live stream or to be there live in person where we can engage with one another. So without further ado, let's get to the interview. Hello, Neil. Thank you for being with us today.
Daryl, it's a real pleasure to be here.
Yes, you've done a lot of great work. Your name is mentioned quite a bit. Your work is mentioned quite a bit in the financial space. I learned about your book, The Fourth Turning, through Lynn Alden, who I really she's one of my favorite analysts and such. And so I'm really just grateful just to be here with you today.
Well, I'm happy to be here with you. So
thank you. So I started reading your book. Your book's pretty hefty. And, through it's like every time I buy these books from like many people that I just like really, that inspire me, it's always about 300 to 500 pages. I've noticed that. So I'm like, okay, here's another book to the shelf I need to get through.
Well, Daryl, there is another way out. There is an audio version. So, if you're driving or doing the dishes or, just jogging outside, and I did the version myself. So it's I don't know, 20 plus hours of my voice. So you get to hear that. Anyway.
Yeah. I think that my only issue with audio books is that sometimes I don't retain as much of the information when I read it, but I'm also like a slow, I wouldn't say a slow, but I like the process when I'm reading. Like I may go back and read a sentence.
Again, me too. I agree with you there. I'm the same way.
Yeah. Well, you've shared your background a lot with many different platforms. And so, and I know your background is very extensive and it could take quite a bit of time. So I already, obviously already done an introduction. And so I do want to kind of just dive into your book and get into some of the meat and potatoes of where you think we're at right now.
Well, we're in the fourth turning, obviously. You can get that from the title of the book. But the word fourth turning is the winter of history. It's a season in which, before it's over, we remake the outer world of America's public institutional life. And so this is going to focus on huge changes in the political, system, in the economy, in infrastructure, in how we're housed, how we live in our neighborhood, sort of the outer world. I sometimes like to contrast the crisis with the awakening. And the awakening are periods when we reshape our inner world, of religion and values and so on. This is very different. And I think that the generation coming of age is very interested in that. They don't want to throw off social obligations. They don't want a world that's more individualized, more random, more risk taking. They want to take out the risk. They want more order. They're looking for that middle class. They're looking for that security, right? When I came of age, young people were not looking for that, right? We were looking to get away from it. This younger generation is looking for that kind of more secure world. And not just in America, but increasingly around the world, we find young people are looking for that. And often that's what attracts them so often to these authoritarian and populist leaders who promise that, right? But this is a very different world we now live in. And there's certain historical lessons about how the world is going to change before it's over. You did start with, a quote on politics, right? And how nothing works anymore, just the dysfunction of our life. And again, I think older generations can sort of say, well, that's really worrisome. That's not like I remember. But on the other hand, younger generations look at it and they see, my God, this is the rest of my life, right? In other words, I can't even get a purchase on the system in this kind of disorder, right? So this is a time when we can expect dramatic changes in the way the whole system works.
Yeah. So, for everyone that's listening, Neil and I, we were talking offline about the political landscape, and this quote within his new book, The Fourth Turning Is Here. I encourage you all to go purchase that, by the way. It's very insightful. So you quoted in your book, 79% of voters agree that America is falling apart. 76% worry about losing American democracy. 62% say that the country is in a crisis. Measures of national happiness and national pride, very proud to be an American, have fallen to record lows. You also mentioned that we can't keep the electricity turned on or baby formula stocked in stores. We can't recall how to enforce laws on the streets or at the border. We can't ensure minimal care for homeless families or minimal compliance from tax evading oligarchs. And then you mentioned we can't conduct a peaceful military withdrawal from an allied democracy or a peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next. And I really enjoyed how you summed up a lot of what's happening in the last, 2-3 years. You summed that up right there in just a couple of paragraphs. And for me, being a millennial, I find myself getting into this self-sufficiency mindset of hey, I just got to look out for me and mine, because I'm pretty pessimistic on the direction that our politics are going and such, and things of that nature. So what are you seeing on that front, as far as the confidence in our political system and where Americans are at with that?
Well, I think it's not there. We have an epic loss of trust, and that's what's leading people toward more extreme politics. We see that in the level of fear in politics has grown. Most people today don't vote for their candidate; they vote against the other candidate. Right? That is one of the hallmarks of the current level of sort of paranoia and fear in our system. We have in 2024, we're likely to get the rematch, right? Biden, Trump, the rematch. So we're headed toward a rematch in 2024, driven largely by this fear of the other, right? And that's what dominates. That's what always dominates fourth turnings, right? And it's sometimes internal, sometimes external. It's usually a bit of both. In other words, it's usually something about two different parts of America against each other, or America against something external to America, right? And it's usually a mix. And a lot of the book, I actually talk about earlier fourth turnings. I talk about, the New Deal and the Great Depression, the Civil War, the American Revolution. I go back and I talk about this mix of fears, right? But you can see that today in that we're getting this rematch, which no one wants. I mean, 60% of voters say that they don't want either candidate. I mean, it's extraordinary. Record share to have an unfavorable view of both candidates, but yet we're getting them anyway. Why? Because we're not driven toward the candidate. We're driven away from the other candidate. And that pushes people into more extreme positions. Somewhere between 8 and 9 out of every 10 Americans say they fear that the other party in power will either, transform America in some way that will be irredeemable, right? Either into fascism or socialism or something from which we will never recover. And that kind of fear makes it very hard for a democracy to work. There was a very great historian, actually, Carl Becker, who's was a great intellectual historian. He wrote back in the 1920s and 30s. A favorite of mine, that was my specialty in graduate school. But he wrote an essay in 1940 reflecting on all these democracies that were taken over by dictators during the 1930s, especially in Europe and in East Asia. And he said, we take democracy for granted. He said, but actually democracy has some pretty amazing and pretty exclusive prerequisites to work. And he said, when you come down to it, democracy only works really well when there's nothing really fundamental to talk about. And it's interesting. He said, democracy works really well when people agree on fundamental values and they're just arguing things about the width of sewer pipe, and how big the road should be, right? I mean, just how to coordinate a community. But when people disagree at a fundamental level, when they hold mutually exclusive views about their community's future, there can't be a democracy. Democracy literally breaks down. I'm not going to agree just by a 51% of the vote to embrace something that I find abhorrent, right? I think you would agree, and we would all agree with that. So, but people aren't paying attention to that. They always think, well, democracy solves everything. It doesn't solve everything. And fourth turnings are periods when our country in these rare episodes transcends democracy in a way, and often through a new kind of consensus, which often requires organized conflict. I mean, we see the kinds of struggles and wars and conflicts we've had in fourth turnings. Creates a new consensus. But that new consensus is liberating because once it's created and once we have a new consensus, of course, then suddenly the political system can function again. It's rejuvenated. It's no longer this old sclerotic, dysfunctional system that we have today. It suddenly is a system that can promote the interest of the young, that can promote too equality rather than privilege, create a new middle class. We've seen that repeatedly at the end of fourth turnings in our history. So it's a time of trial, but it's also a time when we can look forward to a much better America when it's over. And I say that, Joe, because people often think, oh, you have such a bleak message. Well, actually, it's not a bleak message because it means there's an end to this. You know what I mean? And I think that's what people are looking forward to, is an end to trends that we all sense are not sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a good point. And especially like, in the political landscape, we see that, debt and deficits continue to grow. Politicians can't come together to, a consensus on the debt ceiling. And then we can't even balance a budget, right? We can't agree on how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? And so you had this amazing quote within your book, you said, even at its best, America's response to its recent collapse has revealed a distressing preference for policies that exacerbate longer-term challenges. Yes, the bipartisan monetary and fiscal response to the '07 and '09 financial crash and the 2020 and 21 pandemic did protect the have-nots and averted more serious recessions, yet it did so largely through trickle-down, pumping up asset valuations of the wealthy by flattening the yield curve and smothering market volatility. You go on to say that the public braces itself for a dark hour when the Fed can no longer ease and Congress can no longer borrow, no matter how badly the economy founders. Along the way, the dysfunction deepens, debt pyramids grow, savings get funneled into speculation, markets concentrate through consolidation, competition weakens. So you mentioned all these things, and you talk about wealth inequality and how the debt just continues to grow. Where do you see this going? Like, how does this play out historically when debt continues to rise? I mean, we're at the most amount of debt in the history of the nation. And to be honest, like, I don't know how this plays out. Hello, everyone. Sorry for the break in action, but I want to tell you about the link in my description below. This is to the New Orleans Investment Conference. This conference has been around for years and have brought many people out, such as Milton Friedman, Gerald Ford, Alan Greenspan, and Margaret Thatcher. This conference is put on by Brian Lundeen and his team. Brian is the CEO of Gold Newsletter. This year, they're going to have speakers such as Jim Rickards, George Gammon, Peter Schiff, Rick Rule, Danielle DiMartino Booth, Lynn Alden, and many others. Now, I encourage you to click the link in the description below. You can choose to attend the live event, which I will likely be at, as well as the event that is live streamed. You can support the channel by using my link below, so I encourage you to check that out. Now, let's get back to the interview.
Well, it's the debt situation is especially worrisome because it's so high, even without, we're when I talk about fourth turning, I talk about a crisis era, right? But we haven't had a real crisis in the sense of, a great war or a conflict or some enormous struggle, which required public mobilization and a tremendous amount of debt. And yet we already have a debt level which suggests we just went through one, which is truly disturbing, right? From the GFC in 2008, when we went into it and we started running, large deficits, very large deficits, 10% plus of GDP. Through the pandemic, we rose from, about, somewhere around, 50, 60% of GDP to over 100, right, percent of GDP. That's roughly what we did in World War II. But of course, that was a war in which America sort of conquered half the world, defeated fascism, created a whole new world order. You know what I mean? It created a whole new world. It was a tremendous investment in the future. We have that level of debt. Where's the investment? You know what I mean? In what way are we better off? Either internally or with respect to the rest of the world. I mean, that was a struggle that not only lifted America out of the Great Depression in a decisive way, and to some extent, as I document in the book, hugely equalized incomes and wealth in America, and created the original nexus of the Levitt towns and the kind of the middle class that emerged after World War II. But it also created a new world, right, which was much safer and which abetted and sort of enabled a great deal of affluence for decades afterward throughout the entire high-income world, right? What have we done? We're up at that level. We haven't done that. And what I fear is that we will require more debt in the climax of the crisis. And because our public sector is already so large, largely dominated through, payments to individuals, from individuals to individuals, most of them non-poor, by the way. It's just sort of healthcare and pensions and stuff, right? That we're going to have to cut back on a lot of that when this crisis reaches a climax, and I think that's going to be something that Americans aren't expecting. A lot of by the way, this is true throughout fourth turnings. In an emergency, when government is trying to survive, when, government's interested in national survival, it often can't afford to do the kinds of things that it used to do, for individuals. And this is why communities and families become more important during fourth turnings. They always become more important in fourth turnings. And one thing that I tell people, particularly young people, particularly millennials, also Xers, that is that when you think about your financial future, and you think about your portfolio, and you think about how to de-risk everything, the first thing you need to think about is, people say, how can I insure myself for long-term care? Which is, anyone who's tried to buy long-term care knows how utterly unaffordable and what a terrible deal it is, right? But how do I insure myself against these horrible things that can happen to me? And the answer is, get on good terms with your family. If you have one, reconcile yourself to them, find out a way to bring them into your life, find out who your neighbors are, go to a place where you can actually be part of a community, or create your own elective community, but have a community that you can depend upon. These always become more important during fourth turnings. The other thing that always happens during a fourth turning, precisely because we usually have to print a lot of debt in a fourth turning, is nominally denominated fixed income assets become a very bad deal, right? What does inflation do to a fixed income asset? I think we all know that, right? As inflation expectations rise, the value of the bond falls, right? And that's usually exacerbated by financial repression that basically forces you to hold that bond. If you're a bank, or if you hold bonds at a bank, you're not allowed to sell it and so forth. So you're basically stuck with the losses. You don't want to be in that position. So it's very much better to hold real assets, or assets denominated in real terms. This could be equities. This could be, this could be equities in just public markets, or it could be private equity that's not leveraged, or it could be commodities. It could, right? It could be a number of other things. But there are a number of lessons about what sectors do better and what sectors do not do in fourth turnings that we could talk about. But there's a lot on the table, right? When you're thinking about how to brace your world, how to brace your family, and particularly for older generations who are accustomed to leading very unrooted, rootless, cosmopolitan lives with no safety nets. How do they prepare for this world in which that kind of life won't be viable? All these Xers who grew up thinking that the end of history was here, to quote from Francis Fukuyama in the late 1990s, and that the government was going to fade away and there would just be markets and, no governments and markets, and you'd be able to contract with people all over the world, and you just travel around the world with your laptop and, plug in wherever you, right? I mean, this was the idea, right? Basically a Pacific world of sort of a libertarian paradise, right? Mm-hmm. We didn't end up there. That's not the world we now live in. And I think it's hardest for those generations, the people who grew up in that world, to realize that historically that's not been the norm, right? And that when the world enters those periods, we always have to relearn what community really means.
Yeah, that's really good. Especially, for me, I'm a father of 3 kids. I have a 13, a 5-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and so just thinking, ahead, to this decade. I mean, and your projection shows like the fourth turning, coming to climax by 2030 or something like that. Really teaching my kids the value of community and and training them up in that way. And so that's very, very important to me. And I was kind of wondering about, because you mentioned a little bit about fixed income assets. I think 2030, every baby boomer becomes the age of, I think, 65 or something like that. And right now, Social Security, Medicare, I mean, just the projections on the amount of debt that is continuously increasing and how it's likely going to be reduced. I'm not banking on that to be there when I get that age, by the way.
Well,
So what does this look like for, pension, Social Security, retirement for people? I mean, retirement's a new phenomenon in the past, 200 years? I mean, when it was adopted widely after Germany, but what does this look like for this dream of like, we go to our job and we get retirement and you get Social Security? What does that look like? Hello, everyone. Sorry for the break in action, but we are going to have part 2 of this interview uploaded tomorrow. Be sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button so that you can be notified when this video releases. And we hear more from Neil and his perspective on what's going to happen in this fourth turning. Thank you.